The Washington Commanders had a fantastic 2024 season, making it all the way to the NFC Championship game. But with that said, there is still a lot of work to do. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and do my Washington Commanders 2025 mock offseason. But if you guys do want to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button. Let's hop into it. So the way the video is going to work is we're going to be doing everything that the Washington Commanders will be doing this offseason. We're going to begin by managing their finances in the team assets portion of the video. Then we'll talk about some of their team free agents, who we're going to re-sign and who we're going to let walk. We'll talk about some positional team needs. We'll do my free agency plan. And lastly, we'll be doing 2 3-round mock drafts. With that all said, this is an awesome episode because this team has $81 million in open cap space with 7 draft picks. So we have a lot of flexibility to really work with this team. And because the general manager is taking a all-in approach, we can really have a fun video ahead for us. So with that said, let's go ahead and open up a little bit of extra cap space. We're going to hand out 2 extensions. Those contracts are going to go to Terry McLaurin and Brian Robinson Jr. By extending Terry McLaurin, we'll open up an additional $14 million in cap space for this year. And for Brian Robinson, it'll open up about $1.5 million for this year as well. In terms of the contract size for Brian Robinson, I have really no idea what contract he will get. But for Terry McLaurin, I did see an article that said around 3 years, $82 million. So I'll just take that approach. When it comes to restructuring deals, I only have one player that makes a lot of sense to restructure, and that's going to be Frankie Louvu. He's a proven young player that you feel confident is going to be good for this team for many years moving forward. By go ahead and restructure his deal, it'll open up around $6.5 million in open cap space. We're not going to cut any players, but we are going to do something that will actually be a first for my mock offseason videos. We're going to be trading away Jonathan Allen. Now, I don't know what the actual return for him will be. If we do go ahead and trade him away, that will open up an additional $16.5 million in cap space. Now, again, I'm not too sure what we could potentially bring back in return for Jonathan Allen, but if I had to guess, maybe at best you get like a 4th or 3rd round pick. But again, I just don't know. Older player, good sized contract, productivity isn't quite what it used to be. So I don't think you're getting a 1st or 2nd round pick. I honestly don't even think you're going to get a 3rd. I think at best, maybe a 4th round pick, but you never know. You could potentially get a little bit higher than that. All that said, I'm not going to work with the assumption that we're going to get anything in return for him for this video because I just don't know what we can get for him. So in total, after we go ahead and make some extensions, restructure, and trade away Jonathan Allen, we went from $81 million in cap space now up to $119.5 million in open cap space, which is just a lot of money. But with all that said, this team does have a lot of free agents they probably are going to want to bring back. In terms of some actual names of who are unrestricted free agents, you're looking at guys like Bobby Wagner, Marcus Mariota, Jeremy Chin, Clelin Ferrell, Tress Way, Dante Fowler Jr., Zach Ertz, Cornelius Lucas, Jamison Crowder, Noah Igbenogany, Benjamin St. Juste, Alamide Zacchaeus, Diami Brown, Noah Brown, Sheldon Day, Jeremy McNichols, Michael Walker, Zane Gonzalez, Chalon Holmes, Austin Cyber, John Bates, and a lot of other players. Those are just sort of the bigger name guys that most of you guys will recognize. We're going to bring back a whole lot of these free agents because a lot of these players came in on short-term deals and just looked fantastic on this team last year. A big reason why is because they all kind of fit the system and they all were just made really good players because of what Dan Quinn was able to do with both the offense and the defense last year. So in terms of some names, we'll talk about the big names in some extensive detail, but we'll also talk about some of the other names we'll also throw in there at the end. Jeremy Chin, we're going to be prioritizing bringing him back on a 3-year $22.5 million deal. Last year, he just was fantastic for this defense. Via PFF, he had a 69.0 overall grade, a 72.2 run defense grade, and a 66.2 coverage grade. Just a really solid safety that can play both free safety and box safety. I just think he was a priority for me because of his versatility and just how productive he was last year in Dan Quinn's system. We'll also bring back Dante Fowler Jr. on a 2-year $12 million deal. Now, he could very well get a bigger contract than that. PFF is projecting a 1-year $5 million deal, but I think he'll probably get a little bit more than that because of how productive he was last year and the fact that he's a veteran guy who you feel pretty confident moving forward with. We're going to make sure we lock him up long-term for the next 2 years to be a part of our rotational defensive ends. We'll bring back the veteran Bobby Wagner on another 1-year deal, this time worth about $5 million. Bobby Wagner was fantastic fantastic for this team last year. Obviously, getting up there in age, so I didn't want to sign him to a super long-term deal, but a one-year deal made a lot of sense because he can continue to be that veteran who just leads this defense in the backfield. Noah Igbenogany on a 2-year, $9 million deal. Now, this is somebody who was kind of just bouncing around from team to team, not really playing at an extremely high level, but last year came in and just played really solid for this team. I view him as being a long-term cornerback 3 when it comes to an outside corner. I don't know if I necessarily want him to be my starter, but as a rotational corner, I would love to see him continue to develop in the system. 2 years, $9 million is not a massive extension for him, but I do think it's a worthy extension. Zach Ertz on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal had a fantastic year last year from the tight end position. I will say I do think a potential long-term answer could be in question because you just did not see a whole lot from Sanat last year, but we'll obviously have to wait and see if he can become something. And then the rest of the names here are a bunch of rotational guys like Cornelius Lucas on a 2-year, $6.5 million deal, Marcus Mariota, 1-year, $6 million deal, Noah Brown, 2-year, $4 million deal, Alamide Zaccheaus, 2-year, $4 million deal, Jalen Holmes, 1-year, $1.5 million deal, John Bates, 2-year, $4 million deal, Tress Way, 2-year, $6 million, and Austin Seibert, 1-year, $1 million. After all those contracts, we went from $119.5 million all the way down to $72 million, which is still a lot of money to work with. We had to bring back some big name guys, so unfortunately we had to spend a little bit, but I do think it will prove to be worthwhile. But with all that said, let's now go ahead and talk about the team needs portion of this video. This is where we're going to talk about what positional needs this team needs to look to address. I think the number one thing this team has to look to improve is honestly both lines of scrimmage, primarily the edge rushing room, the offensive tackle room, and probably some offensive guards would also be nice. When it comes to the edge rushers, obviously last year, Dorrance Armstrong, Khalil and Farrell, and then, of course, what you got out of Dante Fowler was pretty impressive, but you just clearly need some guys who can get more pressure on the quarterback at a more consistent rates. Obviously, this team isn't going to necessarily be working with the greatest in terms of assets. Like, they don't have, for starters, there's not a lot of great free agents available. The best one is probably Josh Sweat, but even then, I don't know if I would be that interested if I was Washington because I think there's some better name out there potentially in the trade market. In terms of the draft, there are some big name guys, but unfortunately, they have a late first round pick, so there really isn't any big name guys that I feel pretty confident taking unless a James Pierce Jr. were to fall, but even then I don't know if he can be an instant impact guy. So with that said, it's going to be quite difficult to find an edge to really add to this team, but you still brought back the majority of your guys. Obviously Cleveland Farrell will not be back, but you brought back Dante Fowler, you have Dorrance Armstrong, so maybe you could see some development with Jerzon Newton to become a bit more of a bigger part of this pass rushing unit, but I still feel like it is a bit of a need. Offensive tackle is also a need. Now Brandon Coleman last year came in and played okay. He wasn't great by any means, but I would say he was a nice surprise given the fact that there wasn't a ton of expectations. Now coming out of college, there was some potential for him to move inside to play guard, so I will keep that in mind as we go through for the rest of this video, but for now he is our left tackle. And then Andrew Wiley at right tackle has been pretty consistent for most of his career, but last year definitely wasn't necessarily his strongest year per se. I also think he has some flexibility to potentially move inside to play guard, so I will also keep that in mind. And then when it comes to the offensive guard position, obviously Nick Allegretti is there, and he had an okay season, but I think he's best served as sort of a rotational interior offensive lineman, not necessarily a full-time starter. And then Sam Cosmi, somebody who has been fantastic for this team for several years, unfortunately had a knee surgery, and I'm not too sure when he's going to return, so that is a big-time question mark, so we're going to have to look to improve this offensive line this offseason. I also think cornerback is also a bit of a need. Now, I don't think it's as big of a need as both lines of scrimmages, but Mike Sanders still was fantastic, but I believe he probably should stick more as like a nickel / slot corner. Marshawn Lattimore kind of came in, made some plays, but also wasn't clearly his usual self. He was also coming back from injury. Benjamin St. Juste we're not bringing back, so right now your backup cornerback would probably be Noah Igbenogany, who could play on the outside or play in the nickel, so I do think bringing in another outside corner would also be a bit of a need. Wide receiver 2 is also a need. Obviously, Terry McLaurin, who we just gave the extension to, is our number one go-to target, but right now you're looking at Noah Brown and Alamide Zaccheaus as your 2 and 3, and maybe Luke McCaffrey can become something, but not quite sold on that, so I would like to find an upgrade at the wide receiver 2 spot. I think some depth within the linebacker, primarily a younger piece who can be the replacement for Bobby Wagner in 2026, could also be something we look to do in this offseason. And I think running back as well would also be a bit of a need. Now, we did extend Brian Robinson Jr., so that maybe makes me not necessarily prioritize that, but if we can find somebody in the second, third, or or 4th round who I believe can add some value in the running back room, I definitely would consider it. But outside of that, those are the major needs. Let's now go ahead and hop into my free agency plan. So we are now in the free agency portion of the video, and I wanted to reiterate something that I said earlier. The Commanders are taking the all-in approach. So when I look at what that means, I'm looking at completely transforming this team from being really good last year, maybe a smidge lucky, but really good last year, to now becoming legitimate championship contenders. Like, that is the approach the Commanders are taking in the 2025 offseason. So me personally, I am going to be taking in that same approach and going uber aggressive to really improve this team next year and for years to come. This team is at a complete advantage, having $72 million in open cap space in terms of the free agency, and even if they make a couple other moves that can open up even more cap space, they also have a quarterback on a rookie deal who clearly is the guy moving forward. So this team is playing with a lot of advantages. So my first all-in move, and it's actually another first that I've ever done in these mock offseason videos, I am going to be making a trade. Now this trade is going to be sending 2 first-round picks and potentially a 3rd-round pick, and in return we are going to be taking on Myles Garrett. Now Myles Garrett is on a big-time deal, so this will of course impact our free agency moving forward. I have him knocking down around $20 million in cap space in 2025, but he does have a cap hit of like $40 million in 2027, so do keep that in mind, but we'll worry about that when we get to that point in 2027. By trading for Myles Garrett, I think it's a win-win for both the Cleveland Browns, but primarily for the Washington Commanders. For Washington, you're taking the all-in approach. You need to have a consistent pass rusher. Myles Garrett very well could be the guy, and if you do believe that your team is going to be fantastic for the next 5+ years, those first-round picks don't have as much value as maybe they used to have. I think for Cleveland, it also makes sense to trade Myles Garrett to Washington. Obviously, you want to do right by the player by sending him to a team that actually has a legitimate chance to contend for championships. Myles Garrett going to Washington, I think, does kind of check that box. He can go to a contender, but also for Cleveland, you're trading him out of the conference, so you don't have to worry about playing him that often. Obviously, Browns in the AFC, Washington in the NFC. I think beyond that, and this might be a little controversial from Washington fans, but I just want you guys to kind of hear me out on this one. If I am the Cleveland Browns and my trade partners are either Washington, Buffalo, Green Bay, Philadelphia, you know, those super, like Detroit as well, those teams that are going to be consistently contending for championships for the next 5+ years, if I'm looking for a team that has the highest potential to not necessarily be as good in 2026 as they were, or in 2025 as they were in 2024, I think Washington could potentially fit the mold because they have a rookie quarterback who potentially could have a sophomore slump in this upcoming season. And if that were to happen, maybe this team, instead of going for championship, could potentially be like the 18th, 19th, or 20th overall pick, which for Cleveland is a lot more value than, let's say, a team like Buffalo, who potentially could win the Super Bowl next year. So all that to say, I don't necessarily think that will happen, but if you're looking at just probability percentages, I would assume that Washington probably has the highest probability of being the worst team out of the Buffalo Bills, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Green Bay Packers, all those really top-end teams that have a lot of talent. Again, this is not me saying that Washington will be bad next year. I don't think they will. I think they will be a good team. I don't mean to disrespect Jaden Daniels, but we have seen time and time again players that have great rookie seasons go on to have sophomore slumps here and there. So there is the potential that does happen. So if you are Cleveland, you're doing right by your franchise by giving your team the best chance to potentially get a higher first-round pick. And even if it doesn't work out, you're still getting 2 first-round picks and potentially a 3rd-round pick in return for somebody who is awesome in Myles Garrett, but you can probably find a way to replace him, maybe by getting Abdul Carter in this year's draft class. So by doing so, the Washington Commanders have completely bolstered up their defensive line, and man, this is a really good start to our free agency. But beyond that, I did want to make another move on the defensive line, and that is going to be bringing in Osa Odigizua on a 4-year, $80 million deal. To me, this one just makes a lot of sense. Obviously, Jerzon Newton is expected to make even more plays in this upcoming season, but outside of Deron Payne and Jerzon Newton, this team does not have much depth in the defensive tackle room, and I think Osa Odigizua has experience with Dan Quinn, obviously with the Dallas Cowboys last year, same with Dan Quinn, obviously, well, Dan Quinn not last year, but 2023. I think this one makes a lot of sense. I think there would be mutual interest because Osa, from what I've heard, really does like Dan Quinn. From what I've heard, basically every single Cowboy loved Dan Quinn, so it would make sense for Osa to have some interest in Washington. Washington has a lot of money to hand out to Osa Odigizua. Osa can step in there, give you a pass rushing element while also bringing that run stuffing spot. Deron Payne has been good, but clearly hasn't necessarily been the same guy that he used to be. You would now have 3 just absolute studs in the interior of your defensive line with Osa Odigizua, Deron Payne, and hopefully Jerzon Newton can continue to develop. I would feel really confident with that defensive line moving forward. You went from having a okay defensive line to maybe one of the best defensive lines in the nation. I'm going to stick with the defense here and add another outside corner. This time I'm bringing Byron Murphy Jr. on a 3-year $51 million deal. This would be my second outside corner alongside Marshawn Lattimore, Noah Igbenogany, and then of course Mike Sanders still would primarily play in the nickel. Byron Murphy can play with some flexibility. He can also play a little bit in the nickel. He can play outside. I also think he can play a little bit of safety if you really need him to. With that said, he is going to play outside corner for this team. He will be our cornerback 2 and next to Marshawn Lattimore. Byron Murphy has just been uber solid for many, many years to come. Also, I am using PFF and various other sources to kind of come up with these numbers that I'm getting. So 3 years, $51 million, I think makes a lot of sense for Byron Murphy. We're going to move over to the offense now. We're going to add a playmaker next to Terry McLaurin. We're going to be bringing in Stephon Diggs on a 1-year, $16 million deal. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of great options out there in free agency. Yes, I could have made a big swing for T. Higgins, and that would have been fun. I don't know if I necessarily want to go ahead and hand out a 4-year, $120 million deal to T. Higgins. I just think that's a lot of money to put into a wide receiver 2. Whereas for Stephon Diggs, yes, you're throwing $16 million at him, but it's only a 1-year deal. Stephon Diggs is now at this stage of the career where he is a really good wide receiver 2, coming off an injury, but I'm not too concerned about that. He has flexibility to play within the slot. He can play on the outside. You put him next to Terry McLaurin, Alamai Zaccheaus, Luke McCaffrey, Noah Brown. I really do think your receiving core gets drastically better. You get a veteran guy who has shown the ability to make young quarterbacks look really good. He did it with Josh Allen. He did it with CJ Stroud for a little bit. I think he could do the same for Jaden Daniels. He could be another outlet for him to go to that can maybe work a bit more of the underneath stuff, while Terry McLaurin could be the outlet when it comes to more deep balls and stuff like that. We also need to improve the offensive line, and I'm going to be picking up Morgan Moses on a 2-year, $10 million deal. This is going to be somebody who's going to play the right tackle spot, and Andrew Wiley will move inside to play right guard and be the replacement for Samuel Cosmi while he continues to heal up from his surgery. Our new look offensive line is going to be Brandon Coleman at left tackle, Nick Allegretti at left guard, Tyler Biadasz at center, Andrew Wiley at right guard, and then we're going to be bringing in Morgan Moses to play right tackle. I will target the rest of the offensive line probably in this year's draft. Now, do keep in mind, we don't have a first-round pick. We also don't have a third-round pick. So we're going to have to play this one pretty interesting here. Potentially, we might have to make a trade in the third round if we want to potentially take a player. So for now, we only have 1 second-round pick, and we don't have a first. We don't have a third. So we're probably going to have to trade in if we want to potentially take something in the third round for this video. But with that said, my free agency plan is complete. We traded for Myles Garrett. He's going to add some insane pass rushing juice to this defensive line. We brought in Osa Odigizua to add even more to this defensive tackle room. We brought in Byron Murphy to be our second corner next to Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Sanders still. We brought in Stephon Diggs to add even more juice to this offensive receiving weapons. And we brought in Morgan Moses to play right tackle and move Andrew Wiley over to right guard while Sam Cosmi is continuing to heal. But with that said, we are now going to hop into our 2 3-round mock drafts. All right, but as you can see, we are on the PFF mock draft simulator. We are the Washington Commanders. Now, in order for us to actually even take a pick in this year's draft or in this mock draft, we're going to actually have to make a potential move into the first or second round here. So first things first, we need to actually make the trade happen. So let's go ahead and simulate to our 29th overall pick. We are going to make a trade here, trade with the Cleveland Browns. We are going to be taking on Myles Garrett and his big old contract. And in return, Washington will give up 29, a round 1, and 79 overall pick. We're going to go ahead and force this trade. We probably are going to want to make a trade next round to try to get another third round pick because we don't really have much to work with now. So Cleveland is on the board here, and they'll probably take somebody. They'll take Amaron Hampton. We are on the board here at pick 61. Offensive line is a bit of a need. I also think potentially we can also take a running back. Maybe we actually don't need to trade back up. Maybe we go ahead and take a Donovan Jackson here to play left guard, but also could potentially play left tackle. And then in the 4th round, or whenever our next, actually we don't have a 4th round pick either. So in the 5th round, we go ahead and take a running back like, I don't know, Jaden Blue would be interesting. DJ Giddens, if he's still there, Damian Martinez, Brashard Smith, Khalil Mullings. And there's some really good running backs down the board. So actually we will not make a trade back up because I think there's a lot of really good running backs down the board here. So we will stick here at pick 61 and go ahead and take Donovan Jackson. Our new look offensive line will be Brandon Coleman at left tackle, Donovan Jackson at left guard, guard, or Nick Allegretti. It will be an open battle. Tyler Biadasz at center, Andrew Wiley right guard, and then Morgan Moses at right tackle. All right, so this is our first of our 2 3-round mock drafts. Let's now hop into the next one. All right, so we are back up again with pick 61. Last time we took the offensive lineman. We very well could make the exact same pick, but instead of Donovan Jackson, maybe we go with like a Wyatt Milam or Jonas Savania. But I will mix this one up for a little bit of some fun here. Do we maybe look at adding another wide receiver to be more of a wide receiver 3? I think if you have Stephon Diggs, you can play him a bit more within the slot. Terry McLaurin could be a bit more of your deep threat, and maybe you want to find a bit more of a speedster who can stretch the ball, stretch the field vertically, and maybe that's what you can get with a guy like Isaiah Bond or Tej Johnson. I don't view that as being the biggest need because I think you have some pieces already there. Maybe you want to look at tight end to find a bit more of a passing threat. Maybe you want to look at Elijah Arroyo, Mason Taylor, Harold Fannin, or Gunnar Helm. Those are all possibilities, but I'm actually going to look at adding a running back. Now, you have Austin Eckler and you have Brian Robinson Jr., but just don't think that those guys are all that particularly special. Obviously, you paid Brian Robinson Jr. It'll probably be like a 2-year extension. I don't think it'll be a 4-year deal. So maybe you want to kind of develop somebody behind him, or at the very least have a tandem of 3 running backs that can all play, with Eckler being a bit more of like just your screen guy, your offensive guy who can do some things in pass protection. Brian Robinson Jr. could be a bit more of like your David Montgomery, so I think you'd maybe want a bit more of like a speedster. And if that's the case, I think that Dylan Sampson actually makes a lot of sense here. Last year, 1,488 rushing yards, very, very fast type of guy, elusive rating of 107.5, makes guys miss with his speed. We're going to go ahead and take Dylan Sampson here to be our bit more of our Jahmyr Gibbs to our David Montgomery, if you get my drift. All right, so this is the second of our 2 3-round mock drafts. But you guys let me know in the comment section below, what do you guys think of my free agency plan, and did you guys enjoy or dislike the video? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.